President Joe Biden is prepping for what could be a heated phone conversation with French President Emmanuel Macron. Now, the phone call is to smooth over tensions after France reacted pretty angrily last week after hearing about the new partnership between the U.S. and Australia, where the U.S. is selling nuclear-powered submarines to Australia, but Australia had been in talks with France about buying theirs. A call between the two leaders has not been scheduled yet, but officials do believe it's likely to happen. So for more on this, we bring in geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors, John Sitilides. John, thank you so much for joining us. John,
Great to be with you.
This phone call, let's talk about that first. The deal was made last week. Should this phone call have been made maybe a little bit sooner? And, with this upcoming call, how do you see it playing out?
Unfortunately, in life, Farron, there are no perfect solutions. There are only trade-offs. And in this situation, it seems the Biden White House, along with the United Kingdom and Australia, made a decision to go ahead and announce this nuclear submarine agreement. And it's actually a number of other areas as well. It's not just about nuclear submarines. But our understanding is that they gave the French government 1 hour notice before this was released into the public domain. And of course, we now see that there's been a visceral French reaction. But there's a history here of diplomacy or lack of diplomacy that maybe dates back to the end of 2020, when France and Germany concluded an original deal with China for massive investment between the Chinese economy and the European Union, without any consultation with the Biden administration. And when the incoming Biden administration found out about it, they expressed their dismay. There had been no consultation with Bonn and with Berlin, I should say, and with Paris. So there's a little bit of history here of conducting secret diplomacy, but this is really a strategic issue now where the United Kingdom and Australia have decided that there is going to be a long-term strategic constraining operation in the Indo-Pacific region because of the aggressive threat that China poses to the entire Asian continent and to the Indo-Pacific theater.
And it's interesting because, and you mentioned, that deal that happened before with, the EU and all that, and China, Australia, they are saying that, France knew about their concerns. However, with the way France is reacting, it sounds like they kind of didn't know. But when you have deals like this between these countries, like you said, you mentioned the one with China and France and the EU. You have this one with the U.S. and Australia. Is this like another business transaction, or is this very different, much like what you said? Is this more diplomacy rather than kind of a business transaction?
For the Australians and for the United Kingdom, it's a strategic decision. Australia had tried very much to stay out of the U.S. China sort of mini Cold War that had been forming in recent years, really beginning with China's unrestricted warfare against the United States and the global West back around 20 years or so ago when it joined the WTO. But it had looked to bring on board those diesel submarines from France more for near theater defensive operations. But by agreeing to station and to deploy nuclear submarines, this now means they'll be able to go out deeply into the South China Sea, into the East China Sea, to work with the U.S. and the United Kingdom to maintain freedom of navigation for the free and open shipping lanes that provide a foundation for the entire global economy. So this is going to be a very different type of Australian defense and military posture, along with the U.S. and the U.K. And as for France, Farron, it's very difficult to tell whether or not this is serious and genuine or whether it's just theater. There had been many reports in the Australian media over the last 3 to 6 months that the Australian government was reconsidering the diesel submarine deal. And where was French intelligence? They should have had a better sense as to what was happening between the U.S., Australia, and the U.K., and they seem to have failed their own government.
And it's interesting from the American perspective. It has the right to seek out business opportunities, just like every other country in the world. But you know what? You have to think. And at least would this kind of be that big of a deal if it wasn't coming off the heels of the Afghanistan withdrawal? Or is this that, the U.S. is just kind of the top seller for military equipment to everybody? And here France had a shot and they got turned down. I got about 40 seconds left. It's all yours.
I don't see it that way, Farron. I would take a different approach. I think the Biden administration is following on the Trump administration's decision to make a strategic global geopolitical pivot to confronting and containing China. If it wasn't for China's hostile, belligerent activity against all of its neighbors in Asia, and frankly, against Australia, where it imposed a massive boycott on so many of Australia's premier exports to the Chinese economy, simply because the government called for an international investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 virus out of Wuhan, China is almost completely responsible for all of the reactions by its neighbors and countries around the world to its belligerent and increasingly hostile foreign policy.
Well, it'll be interesting about that phone call, because I'm sure when it happens, we'll be giving a phone call to you to come back on and talk about it. Thanks so much, John Sitilides.
I'll be here.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you.